takes years to build a championship contender. It takes a decade of draft picks, meticulous salary cap gymnastics, and absolute faith in a system. You endure the pain. You sell the fans on a vision of the future. You promise them that one day the suffering will mean something. But what happens when that timeline expires? What happens when the future you promised finally arrives? And it looks exactly like the miserable past you swore you left behind? Welcome to Week 24 of the 2026 NHL season. A week where the ice cracked beneath the feet of empires. A week where desperate front offices hit the panic button with 5 games left on the clock. A week where generational talents violently reminded the league of the gap between the good and the divine. We witnessed milestones that defy human aging. We saw teams mathematically alive but spiritually dead. We saw the catastrophic collapse of the Detroit Red Wings, the baffling desperation of the New York Islanders, and the undeniable cold reality that in professional sports, hope is often the most dangerous liability of all. If you think this is just a story about a few bad games or a slump at the wrong time, keep watching. Because this story is not going to go the way you think it does. The collapse we are about to dissect was not an accident. It was a slow-moving car crash, years in the making. To understand the magnitude of the disaster, we have to go back to the blueprint. We have to look at the promises that were made. In Detroit, they called it the Yzer Plan, a methodical, almost clinical approach to rebuilding a franchise that had once defined excellence. The fans were told to be patient. They were told that the accumulation of high draft picks, the careful development of prospects, and the strategic addition of veteran talent would eventually restore the roar to Motor City. They brought in Showtime himself, Patrick Kane, to be the steadying hand, the closer who knew how to win when the air got thin. Over in New York, the Islanders built an identity around defensive suffocation. They believed that structural discipline and elite goaltending could mask any offensive deficiencies. They believed in their culture, and across the league, the narrative was set. The young teams were supposed to rise. The aging veterans were supposed to gracefully pass the torch. The math, the analytics, the advanced metrics, they all suggested a natural evolution. The data told a story of a league finding its equilibrium. The expectations were astronomical. The potential felt limitless. Everything looked perfect on paper. The pieces were in place. The fans had bought the tickets, the merchandise, the dream. It looked perfect. Until it wasn't. Let us look at the numbers, because the numbers lie beautifully. In the early stages of this season, the illusion held strong. Teams were racking up points. Arenas were sold out. The broadcast networks were hyping up the inevitable clash of titans in the playoffs. Look at the Los Angeles Kings. If you just glanced at the standings, you saw a team firmly in the playoff mix, a team battling tooth and nail in the Pacific Division. But peel back the layers, and a horrifying truth emerges. Through 76 games, they had only 19 regulation wins. 19. They were a team that had completely forgotten how to end a hockey game in 60 minutes. They were surviving on the charity of the NHL's loser point, dragging games into shootouts, collecting pity points to mask their fundamental inability to close out an opponent. But the system allows it. The system rewards survival over dominance. And so, the Kings, alongside the Red Wings and the Islanders, continued to believe their own hype. They looked at the standings and saw themselves as contenders. They felt invincible. They felt that as long as they were in the mix, the magic of the playoffs would cure all their regular season sins. They had the talent. They had the belief. They were standing on the precipice of greatness. But then, the pressure arrived. And pressure is the ultimate truth serum. It started on a Sunday, a day usually reserved for reset and reflection. Instead, it delivered pure, unadulterated chaos. Out of nowhere, the New York Islanders front office walked into the locker room and detonated a bomb. They fired head coach Patrick Roy. Let that sink in. 5 games left in a grueling 82-game campaign, with the team clinging to the fringes of the playoff picture, and they fire the coach. They cited a system that left their franchise goaltender, Ilya Sorokin, out to dry. They brought in Pete DeBoer in a desperate, flailing attempt to shock the system. It was a move born not of strategy, but of sheer terror. It was the realization that the culture they bragged about was a house of cards, and they were not alone. In Detroit, the cracks turned into canyons, a must-win game against Minnesota. The kind of game that defines a rebuild. The kind of game where you empty the tank. Instead, the Red Wings stepped onto the ice looking completely sedated. They went down 4-1. The crowd, the loyal, patient fans who had endured a decade of mediocrity, finally snapped. They booed their own team off the ice. In the locker room, you could almost hear the walls caving in. The frustration boiled over. They stormed back in the third period. Patrick Kane tied it up. For exactly 30 seconds, he was the savior. And that's when the discipline evaporated. Kane takes a lazy, reckless hooking penalty on Quinn Hughes out of pure frustration. He goes to the box, the penalty kill collapses. Kirill Kaprizov buries the dagger, securing a hat trick and plunging a knife into Detroit's playoff hopes. A slow-moving car crash, a team breaking down on live television. This was not an isolated incident. This was a structural failure. Year after year, we see the exact same pattern. A franchise preaches patience. They show flashes of brilliance. The fans buy in. The media praises the general manager's vision. They enter the final stretch of the season controlling their own destiny. And then, when the lights are brightest, they choke. Detroit had done this 4 years in a row. They would build up a mountain of goodwill, only to jump off the peak in March and April. Against Columbus, another must-win. They hold a 3-2 lead with 20 seconds left. 20 seconds separating them from salvation. All they have to do is kill the clock. They can't. Adam Fantilli ties it. The Blue Jackets win in a shootout. The curse is real, but it's a curse of their own making. We saw it in New Jersey, a team loaded with offensive firepower, drowning in expectations. Plagued by injuries and a complete lack of defensive identity, their front office finally snapped. Tom Fitzgerald, the architect, was fired. Another era ending in disappointment. But if you think this is already the bottom for these franchises, you have gravely underestimated the cruelty of this sport. While the pretenders were busy collapsing under their own weight, the true monsters of the league were waking up. If you want to understand why these rebuilding teams fail, you have to look at what they are truly up against. You have to look at Connor McDavid. San Jose is desperately trying to stay alive. They have the highly touted rookie, Macklin Celebrini. The media is desperate to anoint him the next generational talent. Celebrini strikes first on the power play. The narrative is writing itself. The future is now. McDavid looks at the script and tears it to shreds. He flips a switch that simply does not exist in other human beings. He takes over the game with a terrifying, effortless violence. He drives the net like he's on a Sunday leisure skate, making professional defensemen look like pylons. He drops Ian Cole to one knee. He undresses the goaltender. He records a hat trick. He casually drops 5 points on the board. It is a stark, brutal reminder. You can rebuild all you want. You can draft smart. But unless you have a god walking among men in your locker room, you are always at the mercy of those who do. McDavid single-handedly erased San Jose's playoff hopes because he decided to. And then there is the ghost of the past refusing to die. Sidney Crosby, a middle-aged man in a kid's game. Everyone wrote the Penguins off as a lottery team. The #SafeSid movement trended. Yet here he is, securing his 21st point per game season. An NHL record, pure, sustained, psychotic consistency. He drags a broken Penguins roster kicking and screaming back into the playoff picture. This is the standard. This is the mountain the rebuilding teams cannot climb. We reach the climax of Week 24, the point of no return. Thursday night, the Bell Center in Montreal, Tampa Bay versus the Canadiens, an arms race for the Atlantic Division. Cole Caulfield hits 50 goals, the first Hab to do it in 36 years. The building is shaking. Corey Perry, a man who has been fighting in this league since the dawn of time, is trying to physically intimidate the youth out of Lane Hudson. Braden Point starts a brawl. It is absolute warfare. Montreal snatches the game in the dying seconds. They assert their dominance. They show the killer instinct that Detroit and the Islanders so desperately lack. And speaking of Detroit, the final nail. A must-win against New Jersey. The season is on the line. They build a 3-2 lead with 9 minutes left. They have the game in their hands. The fans are holding their breath, and they blow it. Jesper Bratt scores the dagger. The arena falls dead silent, save for the bitter, heavy chorus of boos raining down from the rafters. The Detroit Red Wings are officially eliminated. A decade outside the playoffs, the grand plan is in ashes. Over in Washington, the story is almost cinematic in its tragedy. The Capitals and Penguins face off. Sidney Crosby versus Alexander Ovechkin. The two pillars of a generation. The tension is unbearable. Ovechkin is throwing his body around like a rookie trying to make the roster. He wants it. The Capitals shut down Pittsburgh 3-0. After the final horn, Pittsburgh waits on the ice to shake hands, acknowledging the history, acknowledging the potential end of an era. Ovechkin skates right off. He refuses the handshake. He refuses to accept that it's over. He wants one more year. He wants one more war. But the war is over for so many. The Islanders are sent packing by Montreal. The Blues are dead. The Kraken are planning their vacations. The dust settles on Sunday, and the ice is littered with the remnants of broken promises. Why did it happen? How do entire organizations, equipped with millions of dollars in analytics and scouting, fail so spectacularly at the finish line? It is not just bad puck luck. It is a failure of leadership, strategy, and psychological fortitude. First, the leadership. Firing a coach with 5 games left is not a strategic pivot. It is a confession of systemic failure. The front offices built rosters that lacked emotional resilience. When things went wrong, these teams did not adapt. They fractured. Second, the strategy. We live in an era where teams rely heavily on advanced metrics, expected goals, Corsi, zone exits. But spreadsheets do not bleed. Numbers cannot quantify the sheer panic of a 3-2 lead with 20 seconds left. Detroit had the talent on paper, but they lacked the collective muscle memory of how to suffocate an opponent when the stakes were absolute. Third, the structure of the league itself. The NHL's point system, which rewards overtime losses, creates a false sense of security. It breeds mediocrity. Teams like the LA Kings were allowed to believe they were elite because the standings told them so, masking their fatal inability to win games outright. This illusion prevents front offices from making the hard, necessary changes until it is far too late. They fell in love with their own potential. They forgot that potential is completely worthless without execution. This is not just a story about a bad week of hockey. This is a lesson in the brutal, unforgiving nature of professional sports. You can do everything right in the boardroom. You can win the draft lottery. You can make the splashy free agent signing, but the ice does not care about your blueprint. Week 24 was a violently clear separation of the wheat from the chaff. It showed us that true greatness, the kind possessed by McDavid, McKinnon, Crosby, is a force of nature that cannot be replicated by a 5-year rebuild plan. It showed us that culture is not something you print on a t-shirt. It is something you prove when you are down by a goal in the third period with your season on the line. The Detroit Red Wings have to look in the mirror and realize the Yzer plan might be a failure. The New York Islanders have to realize their defensive identity is a ghost. The expectations were shattered, the dreams were crushed, and now the real season begins. The playoffs are here, and there is nowhere left to hide. If you want to understand the deeper tactical shifts, the hidden injuries, and the exact matchups that will define the quest for the Stanley Cup, you need to subscribe right now. The playoff breakdown is dropping next, and I promise you, the chaos is only just beginning. What do you think is the real reason these rebuilds keep failing? Is it the coaching, the players, or a flawed system? Let me know in the comments below. We read every single one.